His name was Ethan Vance. He had it all. Or at least, that's what the world saw. A self-made millionaire who had built an empire from the ground up, a financial guru whose every decision seemed to turn to gold. The magazines called him a genius, a titan of industry. His wealth was staggering, a fortune so vast it felt almost unreal. He owned a sprawling mansion that looked out over the endless ocean, its walls filled with priceless art and silent, expensive things. But all that money, all that opulence, was just a gilded cage. Because inside, the silence was deafening, the emptiness absolute. The day he lost his wife, a light went out in his life that no amount of riches could ever reignite. She was his everything, the one person who saw past the immense wealth to the man he truly was. And when she was gone, she left behind not just a gaping hole in his heart, but two tiny precious miracles, twin boys, Leo and Noah. They were her legacy, and his reason for living. But their grief mirrored his own, a silent, profound sorrow that manifested in a heartbreaking, endless cry. Ethan watched helplessly as his magnificent home became a tomb of sound. The twins' cries echoed through the endless hallways, a constant, painful reminder of what they had all lost. He tried everything. He hired the most expensive nannies in the country, women with impeccable references and charming smiles. He paid them salaries that would make most people's heads spin, enough money to start a new life, to buy a new future. But none of them lasted more than a week. The twins' sorrow was too deep, their cries too relentless. They were inconsolable. They would scream until they were hoarse, their small bodies shaking with an anguish that was unbearable to witness. The nannies would always leave, their faces a mix of pity and frustration, unable to bear the weight of such profound sadness. They saw the job as a test of endurance, and every one of them failed. Ethan, a man who had conquered the financial world with ruthless precision, was completely powerless. He was a ghost in his own house, his expensive suits and polished shoes a stark contrast to the despair that clung to him like a second skin. He had all the money in the world, but he couldn't buy 5 minutes of peace for his children. He couldn't buy back their joy. One day, in a final desperate act, he interviewed another candidate. Her name was Maya. She was 35, a black woman with eyes that held a depth Ethan hadn't seen in years. She didn't have the flashy resume or the recommendations from famous socialites. Before we dive deeper into this journey, if you enjoy stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing your stories too. When Ethan listed all the things he expected from a nanny, she simply listened, her gaze never leaving his. He told her about the twins, about the crying, about the loneliness. He was brutally honest, painting a picture of a house haunted by grief. Finally, he named the salary, an amount so generous it was almost absurd. A normal person would have been overjoyed, but Maya simply nodded, a small knowing smile on her face. Her focus seemed to be not on the money, but on something else entirely. Something Ethan couldn't grasp. That evening, as the sun began to set, the inevitable happened. The crying started. It was a sound Ethan had come to dread more than anything. He had a sinking feeling in his stomach, a certainty that Maya, like all the others, would soon be coming down the grand staircase, her bags packed, a polite apology on her lips. He waited. The minutes turned into an hour. The crying continued, a raw, piercing sound of pure loss. But Maya never came down. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in his chest. He couldn't stand it anymore. He had to go up, to see what was happening. He pushed open the heavy nursery door, ready to find Maya packing, ready to find the children distraught. But what he saw, it stopped him dead in his tracks. It was something so profoundly unexpected, so impossible, that it shattered his perception of everything. Maya wasn't packing her bags. She was doing something no one, with all their professional training and astronomical salaries, had ever even thought to do. Something that no amount of money could ever buy. He stood frozen in the doorway, his heart pounding in his ears. What he saw defied every expectation, every logical thought. The twins weren't crying. They were silent. Not the eerie, unnatural silence of a child who has given up, but a quiet, peaceful stillness. Maya was sitting on the floor in the center of the room, her back to him, humming a soft, melodious tune. In her lap lay Noah, his head resting against her chest, a pacifier gently tucked in his mouth. And right beside her, propped up against her side, was Leo, his small fingers curled around a lock of her hair. It was a sight so simple, so profoundly human, It hit Ethan like a tidal wave. He had spent his immense fortune on specialists, on therapists, on professionals who promised to fix the children's grief. He had poured vast sums of money into programs and tools. But Maya wasn't using any of that. She was simply there. Her humming wasn't a lullaby he had ever heard before. It was a soulful, low sound, almost like a whisper of a song. As she hummed, she gently rocked her body from side to side, a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to radiate a profound sense of peace. The expensive, high-tech rocking chairs he had bought were now sitting idle in the corner. The children, for the first time since their mother's passing, were not just quiet, they were content. Ethan, the man who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals, found himself utterly speechless. The scene before him was a mystery he couldn't solve with any of his usual tools. He had always believed that problems had solutions, that a price could be put on anything, including happiness. But here, in the quiet of his children's nursery, Maya was proving him wrong with a simple, selfless act. She had tapped into something deeper than money, something he had forgotten even existed. As he watched, Maya gently shifted her weight, and Noah's small hand slipped from her hair. The boy's eyelids fluttered, a tiny sigh escaping his lips. He was in a deep, peaceful sleep. Maya looked down at him, a soft, loving smile spreading across her face. It was the kind of smile that didn't know the first thing about wealth or status. It was just pure, unadulterated compassion. Maya had come to this house with no expectations, no demands, other than the chance to help. The colossal salary Ethan had offered her seemed to hold no weight in her world. She was driven by a different kind of richness, a spiritual one. But as the night wore on, and the boys remained in a peaceful slumber, the true weight of the situation began to settle on Ethan. This was a fragile peace, a temporary truce in a war of grief. He knew it could all come crashing down at any moment. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was just a spectator in a moment of his children's lives, a moment Maya had created, and that he was completely, utterly useless. He slipped away from the door, careful not to make a sound, his mind reeling. He was a man accustomed to control, to having all the answers, to being the one in charge. But this was different. This was beyond his comprehension, beyond his control. The next morning, as he walked into the kitchen, the aroma of coffee filled the air. Maya was already there, preparing breakfast. The boys were in their high chairs, giggling. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't heard that sound in months. The twins were holding small toy cars, and Maya was making vroom-vroom noises, her face alight with genuine joy. But as he watched this fragile new reality unfold, a new wave of worry washed over him. He was a millionaire widower with a deep, dark secret. A secret that, if revealed, could shatter this newfound peace and potentially destroy Maya's life forever. A secret that was now even more terrifying to face because of the hope she had brought into his home. A secret that had been tied to his fortune and his wife's death from the very beginning. The secret was a ghost in the house, a shadow that clung to every corner. It was a secret born not of malice, but of a desperate panic decision made in the immediate aftermath of his wife's passing. Ethan's business, the source of his immense fortune, was built on a series of risky investments and high-stakes deals. His wife, Maria, was not just a partner in life, but a brilliant financial mind in her own right. She handled their private investments, a separate wealth that was meant to be their children's legacy, their untouchable future. But what nobody knew, not even his own board of directors, was that in the final weeks of her life, Maria had discovered a flaw in one of Ethan's most ambitious projects. A flaw that wasn't just a risk, but a fundamental lie. A lie that, if exposed, would not only collapse his entire empire, but also lead to a legal and financial scandal that could land him in prison and leave his children with nothing. Maria had confronted him, and in a moment of utter desperation, she had threatened to go public, not out of spite, but out of a fierce desire to protect their children's future and her own good name. The last words they ever spoke were not of love, but of accusations and the cold, hard reality of money. Ethan, reeling from her threat and the news of her sickness, had made a terrible choice. He had signed papers, forged her signature, and moved her considerable fortune into his own accounts, just as the flaw in his business was coming to light. He told himself it was to protect the twins, to ensure they would have something left if his world came crashing down. He had told himself he'd put it all back, that he'd fix everything. But then she died. And he was left with her death, his own guilt, and a ticking time bomb. The sheer amount of money was a monument to his failure, a constant reminder of the choice he made and the woman he lost. He had created a richness for his children that was built on a foundation of lies. And now, here was Maya. A woman who was healing his children with a purity and grace that made his dark secret feel even more monstrous. Her presence was a mirror, reflecting his own ugliness back at him. She was bringing a light into his home that he was terrified to see snuffed out. The twins were flourishing under her care, laughing, playing, their little faces no longer etched with sorrow. They were finally sleeping through the night. The peace she had created was more valuable to him than his entire fortune. He saw her laughing with the boys in the garden, their joy a symphony of sound. He watched her gently wipe a smudge of dirt from Leo's cheek with a tenderness that made his heart ache. He realized that this wasn't just a job for her. It was a calling. And the thought of what would happen if his secret came out, if the media and the legal system came crashing down on him, was unbearable. Not for himself, but for the boys, and for Maya, the woman who had brought them back to life. He couldn't let his greed and his past destroy the only good thing he had left. The thought of losing this new family he was beginning to see form was a torment he couldn't bear. He knew he had to do something. He had to confess. But to whom? And how? The dilemma was a moral maze, and the stakes were higher than any he had ever faced in a boardroom. As he watched them, a profound and terrifying realization washed over him. The twins were laughing, a sound he had longed for. But what if their newfound happiness was a direct result of his own unforgivable sin? What if he was enjoying this peace, this fragile tranquility, knowing full well it was built on a lie that was about to blow up in his face? He knew the police and his wife's family were still investigating the circumstances of her sudden death, her final days a mystery to them. He had created a lie that covered his tracks perfectly. But there was one thing he hadn't planned for. Something his wife had done just before she died. Something that could prove his guilt and reveal his unforgivable choice to the entire world. The pressure was immense, a silent weight that threatened to crush him. Ethan knew he was living on borrowed time. The police, though they had no concrete evidence, were still quietly looking into his wife's death. Her family, a rich and powerful dynasty in their own right, never believed her sudden passing was simply a matter of illness. They believed it was a consequence of the immense stress of his business. They were right, but for the wrong reasons. They suspected he had run the company into the ground, but they didn't know about the secret. The fact that the bulk of her fortune had been moved, and her signature forged, was still a mystery to them. He had covered his tracks masterfully, believing he was protecting the twins' inheritance. Now, with Maya's gentle presence in his life and the twins' newfound joy, the lie felt suffocating. He found himself watching Maya with a new kind of intensity. Not with suspicion, but with a deep, consuming admiration. He saw how she cared for the boys, not with a detached, professional air, but with a genuine, heartfelt love that his own money and status could never buy. She would sit with them for hours, reading stories, her voice a soft melody. She taught them little games, simple things that brought immense joy. She introduced them to the wonders of the garden, teaching them the names of flowers and the sounds of birds. She was rebuilding their world, piece by piece, and he was nothing but a silent observer, a shadow in the background, terrified that he would destroy it all. The fear gnawed at him. He knew that if his secret came out, not only would he lose his company and his freedom, but he would lose the boys. The court would never allow a convicted felon, a man who had defrauded his deceased wife, to retain custody. The thought of losing them, of them going to live with their cold, distant grandparents, was a torment worse than any prison sentence. He had to act. He had to confess. But confessing would mean destroying everything. It was a no-win situation, a moral paradox created by his own terrible decision. One evening, after the boys were asleep, he sat on the terrace, staring out at the ocean. The vastness of the water was a cruel mirror of his own isolation. He felt Maya approach and sit beside him. She didn't speak, just sat in the quiet companionship he had so desperately missed since his wife's passing. The stars twinkled, and for a moment, he forgot his troubles. "They're good boys," she said softly, her voice a gentle balm. "They just needed someone to be here. Someone to listen." Her words were a simple truth, but they hit him with the force of a revelation. He had spent his life chasing money, building his fortune, and believing that was the key to a good life. But here was Maya, a woman with very little material wealth, showing him that true value lay in compassion, in presence, in love. He felt an overwhelming urge to tell her everything, to unburden his soul. He looked at her, ready to speak, when she said something that stopped him cold. Your wife was an amazing woman, Ethan. She was so smart, so kind. Ethan's heart froze in his chest. How do you know that? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Maya looked at him, her eyes soft with remembrance. She helped me once. A long time ago. She was the one who gave me the money to start over, to get back on my feet. She never told anyone, and I promised I never would. But I feel like you should know. The bombshell landed. The woman who had given Maya a new life, the woman who had helped her find a path to her true purpose, was his late wife. The weight of his guilt became unbearable, a monstrous testament to the kind of man he was, and the kind of woman she was. But as he absorbed this stunning revelation, Maya leaned in, her voice dropping even lower. But there's something else. Something she gave me. Something she told me to keep safe, and to only give to you if you were ever truly desperate. She said it was proof of something, a way out. And with that, she reached into her pocket, and pulled out a small, unassuming USB drive. The air on the terrace felt thin. The small USB drive in Maya's hand, an object so mundane and insignificant, suddenly seemed like the most important artifact in the world. Ethan, the tycoon who had closed billion-dollar deals, felt like a scared little boy. His breath was caught in his throat, a knot of terror and hope tightening in his chest. He looked at Maya, the woman who had entered his life as a nanny, and was now revealing herself as a figure connected to his past, to a secret he believed he had buried forever. What's on it, Maya? Please. He whispered, his voice trembling. Maya looked at him with a gentle seriousness, the same he saw when she calmed one of the twins. She gave me this a day before she passed. She said that if something happened, if your fortune was ever lost, or if you were in trouble for something you didn't do, I should give this to you. She said it was your insurance. Maya's words echoed in the silence of the night, and a new wave of shock hit Ethan. His wife, Maria, had planned everything. Not for revenge, but for protection. He, in his arrogance and fear, had assumed the worst, thinking she would expose him to protect herself. But in fact, she was giving him a final chance, a last gift of love, wrapped in an enigma that was only now in his darkest hour being revealed. She was worried about you, Ethan, Maya continued, her voice soft. She knew about the risk of your project and what you were facing. She also knew her family might try to take the boys from you if something went wrong. She told me to keep this safe, because if things got too complicated and your wealth and your name were at risk, this would be the proof that your company wasn't a lie. Ethan was stunned. He had forged her signature, moved her fortune into his account, fearing she would expose him. But what had she done? What was in that small USB that could change everything? He felt an overwhelming shame. He had doubted her. He had betrayed her trust in an act of fear. I don't understand. What does this have to do with my company? She was angry with me. Ethan's voice was weak, the voice of a man who suddenly found himself confronted by a truth far greater than he could bear. She was angry about the lie, not with you. She wanted you to fix things, not to destroy yourself. She didn't want your fortune to be lost to something you no longer controlled, Maya replied, and for an instant, Ethan saw a reflection of Maria in her eyes, a wise and protective woman. He took the USB from Maya, his hands trembling. He ran upstairs, his heart pounding, and inserted it into his laptop in the office. The content was an encrypted document. A file name, Justice for Ethan. With the password Maria had left for him, the document opened. And there, in plain text, was the answer he had been seeking. Maria had not only discovered the flaw in Ethan's company, she had gone further. She had discovered that the real culprit was his partner, the man he trusted most, who was manipulating the data to embezzle an unimaginable amount of money and frame Ethan. She had all the proof, emails, account statements, and even a recorded confession. Ethan read everything, a torrent of information that proved his innocence, but also revealed the extent of his own foolishness. The wealth he had built was in peril, but he wasn't the villain. He was the victim. And his wife, on her deathbed, had done the unthinkable to save him. The tears came, not of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. But the USB's revelation wasn't the only twist that night. He had the proof. But what would he do with it? And more importantly, what had Maria done with the money he had forged for his own account? What if she had foreseen this? What would she have done with that money? The answer seemed to be somewhere in that document. But what had she done with her family's fortune? And the question that echoed in Ethan's mind: would his wife, a woman so magnanimous, really have hidden his fortune to protect herself from her own husband? What if the USB didn't contain the whole truth? What if it was just the beginning of a chess game he didn't even know he was playing? The truth was a whirlwind, and Ethan was caught in the middle of it. The USB drive held the key to his freedom, the proof that his partner, a man he had trusted like a brother, was the real thief. A vast sum of money had been siphoned off over years, funneled into shell corporations that were now being linked back to him. Maria's document was a masterpiece of forensic accounting, a web of deceit laid bare. It was more than just a list of transactions. It was a detailed plan for Ethan to follow to expose the fraud without implicating himself. His wife, it turned out, hadn't just been angry. She had been a silent partner in his defense, planning her final magnificent move to protect her family. But as he read on, a new twist unraveled. The document wasn't just a confession. It was a digital map. A map leading not to more legal evidence, but to something much more personal and profound. Maria hadn't just exposed his partner, she had also anticipated his own panicked actions. She knew he would forge her signature and move her private fortune. So, she had created a fail-safe. A secondary digital vault, an account that contained not just her wealth, but a final message for him, a message she wanted him to find when he was truly ready to see the truth. She had encrypted the access to this account with a riddle, a puzzle only he could solve. Ethan stared at the screen, his mind racing. The riddle wasn't about money or finance. It was about their life together. It was a series of questions about their most cherished memories, the place where they had their first kiss, the song they danced to at their wedding, the first word their son Leo spoke. Each answer was a key to a piece of the puzzle, a step closer to the truth. He spent hours, his fingers flying across the keyboard, a man who once manipulated the stock market now solving a love letter to his own past. He wasn't chasing riches anymore, he was chasing a memory. With each correct answer, a part of his guilt lifted. He realized that Maria hadn't doubted him, she had doubted his judgment. She knew he was a good man, a loving husband and father, but a naive businessman. The entire game was a final act of trust, a test of his love and his ability to see past the numbers and remember what truly mattered. Finally, he solved the last piece of the puzzle. The account opened. Inside, he found a significant portion of Maria's original fortune, but not all of it. A large sum of money had already been transferred out, with a single clear destination, a foundation for underprivileged families, run by a woman named Maya. Maria hadn't just saved Ethan, she had used her wealth to empower the very person who would one day save their children. It was a circle of compassion, a final testament to her heart. And the remaining money? A final note from Maria was attached. This is for our boys, for their future. And for you, my love, to build something new. Something real. The message was a final cathartic blow, a testament to her love and forgiveness. The digital map was a treasure hunt, a final love letter from Maria to her husband. Ethan spent the rest of the night deciphering the riddles, each one a memory of their life together. The last piece of the puzzle was a question about a small, faded photograph he kept in his wallet, a picture of them at the exact moment they met, on a charity dinner 5 years ago. He realized that Maria's private fortune wasn't just a simple transfer, it was a carefully curated gift. A large part of it had been used to create a trust for the twins, ensuring their future was secure, no matter what happened to his business. The rest, a sizable amount, was a new foundation for single mothers, led by a woman who Maria had secretly helped years before, Maya. When dawn broke, a new Ethan emerged from his office. He wasn't just a millionaire anymore, he was a man unburdened. He walked downstairs, a sense of purpose guiding him. He found Maya in the kitchen, making pancakes. The boys, Leo and Noah, were in their high chairs, giggling and covered in flour, their small faces lit up with joy. They were a world away from the sobbing children he had left behind just a few days ago. The change was so profound it brought a fresh wave of emotion to his eyes. Leo reached out a little hand to Maya, and she gently wiped the flour from his cheek. She wasn't just their nanny anymore. She was family. Ethan watched them, a profound sense of gratitude washing over him. He realized that all the money in the world couldn't buy what Maya had given them: hope, kindness, and a mother's touch. He approached them, a new smile on his face. "Good morning," he said, his voice softer than they had heard it in months. Maya looked up, a questioning look in her eyes. "Maya," he started, his voice a little shaky, "I read the message. Maria. She told me everything." She told me about the foundation and about you. She said you are the most trustworthy person she ever met. Maya's eyes widened, a tear starting to form. She hadn't expected him to find out about her past, about Maria's kindness. It was a secret she had kept, a debt of gratitude she felt she could never repay. But Ethan wasn't looking at her as a nanny anymore. He was looking at her as a partner, a part of the family that Maria had entrusted him to build. He knew what he had to do. The fortune and the wealth were just tools. It was time to use them for their true purpose, to honor his wife's legacy and to build a new life for his sons, with the woman who had already given them so much. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, share this video and tell us in the comments, what part of this journey moved you the most? There's another story waiting for you, and it might just change the way you see the world. Thank you so much for watching and see you soon.